The autumn rain pelted against the tall windows of Clarence's house as Queen Camilla sat nervously in her private sitting room. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone, listening to her sister Annabelle's desperate voice on the other end. The conversation that had started as a routine family catch-up had quickly turned into something much more serious. "Camilla, please, you have to understand," Annabelle pleaded through the speaker. "Mark's business is failing, and we're facing bankruptcy. The creditors are threatening to take the house, and with the children's school fees, we don't know where else to turn." Camilla closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Since marrying Charles and becoming queen consort, she had tried to maintain boundaries between her royal duties and her personal relationships, but family had always been her weakness. Her brother Mark had always been the entrepreneurial one, starting various business ventures with mixed success, but this time seemed different. This time, the stakes were higher. "How much are we talking about?" Camilla asked quietly, already knowing that whatever the amount, it would be substantial enough to cause problems within the royal household. £2 million, Annabelle whispered. "I know it's a lot, but Charles has access to the duchy funds, and surely the family could help us just this once. We're not asking for charity, Camilla. Mark has a new business plan that could pay everything back within 5 years." Camilla felt her heart sink. £2 million was indeed a significant sum, even for the royal family. More importantly, she knew that using Duchy of Cornwall funds for personal family matters would cross lines that had been carefully drawn by centuries of royal protocol. The monarchy's finances were scrutinized by Parliament and the public alike, and any misuse could create a scandal that would damage not just Charles's reputation, but the entire institution. That evening, Camilla found herself pacing the length of her bedroom, rehearsing how she would approach Charles with her family's request. She had always been careful not to overstep her position or take advantage of her husband's wealth and status, but watching her family struggle felt like a betrayal of everything she had been raised to believe about loyalty and support. Charles entered their private quarters looking exhausted after a long day of meetings with government ministers. His face was etched with the familiar lines of stress that had become more pronounced since taking the throne. The crown was heavier than anyone could imagine, and Camilla could see how the constant pressures of kingship were wearing on him. "Darling, you look troubled," Charles said, loosening his tie as he settled into his favorite armchair. "What's weighing on your mind?" Camilla took a deep breath and sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Charles, I need to discuss something rather delicate with you. It's about my family." She proceeded to explain Mark's situation, watching as Charles's expression grew more serious with each detail. She spoke about the failing business, the mounting debts, and the potential loss of the family home that had been in the Parker Bowles family for generations. As she talked, she could see her husband's mind working, calculating not just the financial implications, but the political and constitutional ramifications of what she was essentially asking. "My love," Charles said gently when she finished, "I understand your concern for your family. I truly do. But surely you realize the complications this would create." Camilla nodded, but pressed on. "I know it's not simple, but, Charles, this is my brother we're talking about. The man who walked me down the aisle when my father couldn't. The uncle to my children. We can't just stand by and watch them lose everything." Charles stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that Camilla recognized as his thinking pose. The rain continued to streak down the glass, creating patterns that seemed to mirror the complexity of their situation. "The Crown Estate and Duchy funds are not my personal bank account, Camilla," he said quietly. "Every expenditure is documented, reviewed, and must serve a legitimate royal purpose. If I were to authorize such a loan, it would require justification to the Privy Council and likely parliamentary oversight. But couldn't we find a way?" Camilla asked, her voice carrying a note of desperation that she immediately regretted. "Perhaps through one of the charitable foundations, or as a private loan from your personal accounts." Charles turned back to face her, and for a moment, Camilla saw not the King of England, but the man she had fallen in love with decades ago. His eyes were filled with compassion and understanding, but also with the weight of responsibility that came with his position. "Even my personal wealth is not entirely my own," he explained. "The sovereign grant, the income from the Duchy of Lancaster, all of it comes with strings attached and expectations of how it should be used. The moment we blur the lines between public and private funds, we open ourselves to criticism that could damage the monarchy's reputation for generations." The conversation continued late into the night, with Camilla presenting every possible argument, and Charles patiently explaining why each option was problematic. She suggested they could structure it as an investment rather than a loan, but Charles pointed out that the royal family was prohibited from engaging in speculative business ventures. She proposed using money from royal wedding gifts, but those funds were typically donated to charity or held in trust for specific purposes. As the hours passed, Camilla began to realize that her husband's reluctance wasn't born from a lack of love for her or disregard for her family's plight. Instead, it stemmed from a deep understanding of his constitutional role and the careful balance that had to be maintained between his personal relationships and his duties as sovereign. What if Mark approached the bank again? Charles suggested. Or perhaps we could help him find investors through legitimate business channels. I could make some introductions, provide references for his character. But Camilla knew that conventional funding sources had already been exhausted. Mark had spent months trying to secure loans and investments, but the economic climate was harsh, and his previous business failures had made lenders wary. The time for traditional solutions had passed. The next morning, Camilla made the difficult phone call to her sister, explaining that she needed more time to consider options. She could hear the disappointment in Annabelle's voice, though her sister tried to hide it behind understanding words about royal protocols and responsibilities. For the following week, the request hung between Charles and Camilla like an unspoken tension. During their public engagements, they maintained their usual warmth and partnership, but in private moments, Camilla found herself distant and contemplative. She understood her husband's position intellectually, but emotionally, she struggled with what felt like choosing the crown over her family. Charles, for his part, was quietly exploring every possible avenue to help without compromising his constitutional position. He consulted with his private secretary, his legal advisors, and even reached out discreetly to some of his wealthy friends who might be interested in investing in Mark's business venture. However, each conversation only confirmed what he already knew. Any direct financial assistance from royal sources would be inappropriate and potentially scandalous. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Highgrove House. Camilla's children, Tom and Laura, were visiting with their own families, and the atmosphere should have been joyful and relaxed. However, Camilla found herself distracted and emotional, snapping at innocent comments and withdrawing from conversations. After the guests had left, Charles found Camilla in the garden, despite the cold October evening. She was sitting on their favorite bench, staring out at the organic garden they had cultivated together over the years. "My darling," Charles said, sitting beside her and taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "I can see this is tearing you apart." Camilla turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Charles, I've never asked you for anything like this before, and I know I likely never will again. But this is my family. These are people I love, people who supported me through the darkest times of my life. How can I have all this?" She gestured toward the grand house behind them, "and watch them lose everything?" Charles felt his heart break a little at the pain in his wife's voice. He loved this woman who had stood by him through his own darkest hours, who had endured public criticism and media scrutiny to be by his side. The thought of causing her pain was almost unbearable. "I know, my love," he whispered, pulling her closer. "And if I could wave a magic wand and solve this problem without consequences, I would do it in an instant. But I can't separate myself from the crown, even for family. Especially not for family." That night, as they lay in bed, both staring at the ceiling in the darkness, Charles made a decision that would test their marriage and send shockwaves through the palace. He would formally decline the request, but he would also take steps to ensure that his decision was communicated in a way that protected both his constitutional position and his family's dignity. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Buckingham Palace as Charles prepared for what would become one of the most difficult conversations of his reign. He had requested a formal meeting with his private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, and his senior advisors to address the delicate matter of his wife's family request. The decision to decline had been made, but the manner of that decline would require careful navigation. Sir Clive entered the king's study promptly at 9 o'clock, followed by the deputy private secretary and the press secretary. These were the people Charles trusted most with sensitive family matters, individuals who had served the royal household for decades and understood the intricate balance between personal relationships and constitutional duty. "Gentlemen," Charles began, settling behind his father's old desk, which he had inherited along with the crown, I need to address a private family matter that has potential implications for the monarchy. My wife's family has requested significant financial assistance, and I have decided to decline this request. However, I want to ensure that our response is handled with appropriate sensitivity and discretion." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Sir Clive, a man who had navigated countless royal crises, immediately understood the complexity of the position. A rejected family request could create lasting tensions within the royal household, potentially affecting the Queen Consort's well-being and public role. "Your Majesty," Sir Clive said carefully, "might I ask the nature of the request and the reasoning behind your decision?" Charles explained the situation with Mark's failing business and the £2 million assistance request. He outlined the constitutional concerns, the potential for public criticism, and the precedent that such assistance might set for future family requests. As he spoke, he watched his advisor's expressions shift from concern to understanding to subtle approval of his decision. "The decision is constitutionally sound, Your Majesty," the Deputy Private Secretary confirmed. "The precedent for using royal funds for extended family business ventures would be highly problematic. However, we need to consider the personal impact on Her Majesty." This was exactly what Charles had been dreading. Throughout their relationship, Camilla had been his strongest supporter and most trusted advisor. The thought that his constitutional duties might damage their personal relationship was a burden he felt deeply. He had seen what the pressures of royal life had done to his first marriage, and he was determined not to repeat those mistakes. "I want to propose a compromise," Charles said, leaning forward in his chair. "While I cannot provide direct financial assistance, I would like to explore alternative ways to help the Parker Bowles family. Perhaps we could facilitate introductions to potential investors, or provide character references that might help secure conventional financing." The press secretary, Margaret Thompson, who had joined the royal household from a successful career in financial journalism, raised a concern that had been troubling her since the meeting began. "Your Majesty, with respect, any involvement by the Crown in facilitating business arrangements for family members could still be problematic. The media would likely interpret such assistance as inappropriate use of royal influence." Charles felt the walls of his constitutional cage closing in around him. Every possible avenue of help seemed to lead to potential scandal or criticism. The monarchy's reputation, built over centuries and carefully maintained through decades of public service, could not be risked for personal family matters, no matter how genuine the need. Meanwhile, in her private apartments, Camilla was struggling with her own sense of isolation and guilt. She had canceled her morning engagements, claiming a mild indisposition, but, in reality, she could not face the prospect of public appearances while her family's crisis remained unresolved. Her lady-in-waiting, Dame Sarah Keswick, had been with her for years and could sense the emotional turmoil beneath her mistress's composed exterior. "Ma'am," Dame Sarah said gently as she served morning tea, "perhaps it would help to talk about what's troubling you?" Camilla looked up from the untouched papers on her desk, her eyes red from a sleepless night. For a moment, she considered maintaining the royal facade of composure, but the weight of her emotions was too heavy to bear alone. "Sarah, how does one choose between duty to the crown and loyalty to family?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always believed that family comes first, that we stand by those we love no matter what. But now I'm being told that my position makes such loyalty inappropriate." Dame Sarah, who had served several members of the royal family throughout her career, understood the unique pressures that came with marrying into the monarchy. She had seen how the institution could isolate individuals from their previous lives and relationships, creating a golden cage that, while luxurious, could be profoundly lonely. "Ma'am, if I may speak freely," Dame Sarah said, sitting down across from Camilla in a gesture of familiarity that was rare, but not unprecedented. "Your loyalty to your family is one of the qualities that makes you so beloved by those who know you. But you've also shown tremendous loyalty to this country and this institution. Perhaps the question isn't about choosing between them, but about finding a way to honor both." Camilla appreciated the sentiment, but she struggled to see how such a balance could be achieved. Her family needed immediate financial assistance, and the royal household was governed by rules and protocols that made such assistance impossible. The theoretical comfort of balancing loyalties meant little when her brother was facing bankruptcy. That afternoon, Charles made the decision to personally call his wife's sister, Annabelle, to explain his position directly. It was an unprecedented step for a reigning monarch to involve himself so personally in extended family financial matters. But Charles felt that the situation required his direct intervention to prevent lasting damage to family relationships. "Annabelle," Charles said when the call connected, "I wanted to speak with you personally about Mark's situation. I hope you understand that my position as king places certain constraints on how I can help family members, even family members I care about deeply." Annabelle, who had been expecting this call since Camilla had mentioned needing time to consider options, tried to maintain her composure despite the disappointment she felt. "Your Majesty, we understand the complexities of your position. We never intended to create difficulties for you or Camilla." "I know that," Charles replied warmly. "And I want you to know that my inability to provide direct financial assistance doesn't reflect any lack of concern for Mark's well-being or your family's situation. The constraints of my constitutional roles sometimes prevent me from acting as I might wish to personally." The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Charles explaining the constitutional principles that governed royal finances and Annabelle expressing her understanding while clearly struggling with disappointment. By the end of the call, both parties had reached a mutual understanding of the situation, but the underlying problem remained unresolved. When Charles found Camilla later that evening, she was in their private sitting room, staring into the fireplace with an expression of profound sadness. He could see that the day's events had taken a significant emotional toll on her, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility for her pain. "I spoke with Annabelle today," Charles said, settling into the chair beside his wife. "I wanted her to hear directly from me why we can't provide the assistance they've requested." Camilla nodded without looking away from the fire. "I appreciate you making that call, Charles. It couldn't have been easy for you. What's not easy is watching you suffer because of decisions I have to make as king," Charles replied, reaching for her hand. "I married you, not just the institution. But sometimes it feels as though the crown comes between us and the people we love." For the first time in days, Camilla turned to look directly at her husband. In his eyes, she could see the same conflict that was tearing at her own heart. He was genuinely torn between his love for her and his duty to the crown, just as she was torn between her loyalty to her family and her understanding of royal protocol. "Charles," she said softly, "I know you're doing what you believe is right, and intellectually, I understand the reasons. But my heart is breaking for Mark and Annabelle, and I feel helpless in a way I've never experienced before." That night, as news of the king's decision began to circulate among the senior palace staff, the atmosphere within the royal household became noticeably tense. Staff members who had worked with the royal family for decades recognized the signs of a serious internal conflict. Conversations became more subdued, and there was a palpable sense of unease about the potential long-term implications of the situation. The palace press office, led by Margaret Thompson, began preparing contingency plans for potential media coverage of the family situation. While the request itself was private, the British tabloids had a remarkable ability to uncover royal family tensions, and any hint of conflict between the king and queen consort would generate significant public interest. "We need to be prepared for questions about the queen consort's recent canceled engagements," Margaret told her team during their morning briefing. "If this story breaks, we'll need to present a unified front while respecting the family's privacy." Meanwhile, in the broader royal household, other family members were beginning to sense the tension. Princess Anne, who had always maintained a pragmatic approach to royal finances, privately supported her brother's decision, but worried about its impact on Camilla's well-being. Prince William, as heir to the throne, understood the constitutional principles at stake, but also recognized the personal cost of such decisions. The ripple effects of Charles's decision were beginning to spread beyond the immediate family, creating a sense of unease that would soon test the unity and stability of the royal household in ways that none of them had anticipated. The news of King Charles's decision spread through Buckingham Palace like wildfire on a dry autumn day. By dawn, every senior staff member from the Lord Chamberlain to the newest equerry had heard whispers of the unprecedented family conflict. The palace, normally a model of disciplined efficiency and unwavering protocol, found itself frozen in a state of collective shock and uncertainty. In the servants' quarters, conversations that would normally center on daily schedules and royal preferences had shifted to hushed discussions about the implications of a monarch declining his wife's family request. Betty Morrison, who had served as head housekeeper for 15 years, gathered her staff in the break room before the morning shift began. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said in the authoritative tone that had maintained order through countless royal crises. "I'm sure you've all heard rumors about the current family situation. Whatever you may have heard, our duty remains unchanged. We serve their majesties with discretion, loyalty, and professionalism. Gossip has no place in this household." But even Betty's stern words couldn't dispel the atmosphere of unease that had settled over the palace like a heavy fog. Staff members who had worked through royal divorces, deaths, and scandals recognized this situation as uniquely troubling because it struck at the heart of the monarchy's most personal relationships. In the Queen Consort's private office, her secretary Caroline Henderson was struggling to maintain normal operations while her employer remained in emotional turmoil. Camilla had emerged from her apartments that morning with red-rimmed eyes and a forced smile that fooled no one who knew her well. She had insisted on maintaining her public schedule, but her distraction was evident to everyone around her. "Your Majesty," Caroline said carefully as they reviewed the day's engagements, "the children's hospital visit this afternoon includes a particularly emotional ward. Perhaps we should consider rescheduling if you're not feeling at your best." Camilla straightened in her chair, summoning the composure that years of public service had taught her. "Caroline, my personal feelings cannot interfere with my duties to the people who are counting on these visits. We proceed as planned." But as the morning progressed, it became clear that Camilla's emotional state was affecting not just her own performance, but the entire atmosphere of the royal household. During the morning briefing with senior staff, she was unusually quiet, offering none of her typical insights or gentle corrections to protocol suggestions. Her lady-in-waiting exchanged concerned glances with the private secretary, both recognizing that the situation was more serious than anyone had initially realized. Meanwhile, King Charles was experiencing his own crisis of confidence as the reality of his decision's impact became apparent. During his weekly audience with the Prime Minister, he found himself distracted and emotionally distant, struggling to focus on matters of state while his personal life remained in turmoil. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who had developed a comfortable working relationship with Charles over the months since his accession, noticed the change in his sovereign's demeanor immediately. "Your Majesty, forgive me for saying so, but you seem particularly burdened today. Is there anything concerning the government that I should be aware of?" Charles appreciated the Prime Minister's discretion, but knew he could not discuss family financial matters with the head of government. "It's nothing that affects affairs of state, Prime Minister. Sometimes the personal costs of this position weigh more heavily than others." After the audience ended, Charles remained in his study, staring out at the palace gardens where he and Camilla often took their evening walks. For the first time since becoming king, he found himself questioning whether he had made the right decision. The constitutional arguments remained sound, but the human cost was proving higher than he had anticipated. The breaking point came during the afternoon when Dame Sarah Keswick approached Sir Clive Alderton with concerns about the Queen Consort's well-being. The two senior staff members, who had served the royal family through numerous crises, recognized that the current situation required immediate attention to prevent long-term damage to both the monarchy and the marriage that had brought such stability to Charles's personal life. "Sir Clive," Dame Sarah said during their private meeting in his office, "Her Majesty is struggling more than she's letting on. I'm concerned about her ability to maintain her public duties if this situation continues to deteriorate." Sir Clive, who had been monitoring the situation carefully since the morning briefing, shared Dame Sarah's concerns. "I've been considering whether we need to involve other family members or explore alternative solutions. The current trajectory is unsustainable for everyone involved." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock on the door. Margaret Thompson, the press secretary, entered with news that would transform the private family crisis into a potential public relations disaster. "Sir Clive," Dame Sarah, Margaret said, her usually calm demeanor showing signs of stress, "I've just received a call from the editor of The Sun. They've somehow learned about the Parker Bowles family's financial difficulties and are asking for comment on rumors of a royal family loan request. We need to prepare for potential publication within 48 hours. The blood drained from Dame Sarah's face as she realized the implications. A public revelation of the family's request and the king's refusal could damage both the monarchy's reputation and Camilla's standing with the public. More personally, it would expose the Parker Bowles family's private financial struggles to national scrutiny and ridicule. Sir Clive immediately went into crisis management mode, his years of experience guiding his response. "Margaret, what do we know about their sources and how much detail they have?" "They know about Mark's business failures and debt situation," Margaret replied, consulting her notes. They're asking specifically about whether the king has been approached for financial assistance and what his response has been. They seem to have gotten the information from someone close to the family's creditors. The realization that the story might break publicly sent shockwaves through the senior staff. Within an hour, emergency meetings were being held throughout the palace as various departments prepared for potential media coverage. The palace press office began drafting statements that would protect both constitutional principles and family privacy, while the security team assessed potential risks to family members who might become targets of media attention. When Charles was informed of the media interest, his first thought was for Camilla and her family's privacy. He immediately requested a meeting with Margaret Thompson to discuss response strategies. But he also knew that the time for private resolution was running out rapidly. "Margaret," Charles said when they met in his study, "our primary concern must be protecting the Parker Bowles family from unnecessary public scrutiny while maintaining the integrity of the monarchy's constitutional position. Can we achieve both objectives?" Margaret, who had managed royal media relations for 8 years, understood the delicate balance required. "Your Majesty, we can attempt to minimize coverage by providing a brief, factual response that acknowledges the situation while emphasizing privacy concerns. However, once this story breaks, it will likely generate significant public and media interest in the broader questions of royal family finances and relationships." That evening, as news of the potential media exposure spread throughout the palace, the atmosphere became even more tense and uncertain. Staff members who had maintained professional composure throughout the day began showing signs of stress and concern. The royal protection officers increased security protocols, anticipating potential media attention at family residences. Most significantly, the other senior members of the royal family began to involve themselves in the situation. Princess Anne, known for her direct approach to family matters, requested a private meeting with Charles to discuss the situation's implications. Prince William, understanding his future position's requirements, offered to mediate between his father and stepmother to find a resolution that would protect both the monarchy and family relationships. The palace, which had operated with clockwork precision for centuries, found itself frozen between competing loyalties and principles. The institution that had survived wars, revolutions, and constitutional crises was now facing a challenge that struck at its most fundamental tensions: the balance between duty and family, between constitutional principle and personal relationships, between public service and private loyalty. As night fell over Buckingham Palace, Charles and Camilla sat together in their private sitting room, both understanding that their marriage and the monarchy itself faced a test that would define their reign's character. The decision that had seemed clear from a constitutional standpoint had created ripple effects that threatened to undermine everything they had worked to build together. The next morning would bring new challenges and difficult conversations, but tonight, the palace stood frozen in shock, waiting to see whether love or duty would ultimately prevail in the heart of the British monarchy. The institution that had endured for over 1,000 years faced a moment where its future depended not on constitutional law or public opinion, but on the personal relationship between a king and queen who had found love late in life and now risked losing it to the demands of the crown. In the end, the story would become a defining moment in Charles's reign, teaching both the royal family and the nation about the true cost of constitutional monarchy and the sacrifices required of those who wear the crown. But, for now, the palace remained frozen, caught between duty and love, principle and family, waiting for dawn to reveal what choice would ultimately be made.